Then comes,
What do you expect me to say?
Then comes Hurricane Katrina in 2005. You were accused by a singer of not caring about black people.
Yeah, look, it wasn't just one person. This was an opportunity for people to use the response to Katrina as a way to label me a racist, and I didn't like it one bit. And I expressed significant displeasure. You know, you can call me names, which they did, but being labeled a racist is something I just I couldn't stomach then. I can't stomach now. It's just really unbelievably unfair. There's some. I mean, Katrina was, you know, a case of, as I put in the book. You know, I've prided myself on making decisions. It was just a delayed decision. In other words, it took me too long to make a decision. I did something not very smart either, which was to fly over New Orleans, have my picture taken on Air Force One, and then they put the picture in the newspaper so it looked like to people I didn't care. You know, I was looking at the deal from 20,000 feet or however high we were. I do remind people, however, that the federal response started initially after the storm hit, and 30,000 people's lives were saved by the United States Coast Guard. And there wasn't one, as I said when I went down to New Orleans, there wasn't one helicopter pilot or rescue Coast Guardsman that said, well, I'm not taking you off that roof because you happen to be black. I mean, they were picking people up all colors, all races, all ages to save life. The question is, should I have put federal troops without the capacity to protect themselves in New Orleans? And this, we probably don't have enough time to, my advice is read the book, because I walk you through Posse Comitatus, which basically says the president cannot put troops in for law enforcement in the United States without either declaring the situation an insurrection or being asked to do so by the governor of a particular state. And if I had to do it over again, and I was swayed, just so you know, by the broadcasts of the area where there was shootings and snipers and all the things we heard about, many of which did not turned out not to be true. But you know, if I had to do it over again, which you don't get to do, I just put the 82nd Airborne without the capacity to defend themselves, and I think it would have changed the psychology of the whole situation quickly.
Mr. President, I don't recall you speaking a lot about Africa or AIDS issues in your 2000 campaign, but your administration did a lot on that. Yeah. I think a lot of people aren't aware of that. Can you tell the audience something about that?
Well, Condi, early on, when I was getting to know Condi and courting her to try to become my national security advisor, and I talked a lot about Africa. And if you think about Africa at that point in time, you have to think about the pandemic of AIDS. Any policymaker couldn't, you know, say, I want to do something with Africa and not immediately go to the AIDS issue. And I did. And I walked the reader through some very poignant scenes about what Laura and I saw when we went to Africa, but also the strategy to spend your money that ultimately saved millions of lives. People say, why did you do that? And I think there's two reasons why. One, national security reasons. We face an enemy that can only recruit hopeless people. And I think there's got to be nothing more hopeless than a child watching their parents die of AIDS and nobody helping. And we have the capacity to help in America. And the other thing is, I believe it's important to live by certain principle, one of which is to whom much is given, much is required. And I think as a nation, we're better for it. And so I do devote a chapter called Lazarus, because many people were talking about, after the PEPFAR program, that's what it's called, after it was implemented, many people said people were like Lazarus, they're rising from the dead. I tell a funny story. I think it's funny. So Josh Bolton, my dear friend and second chief of staff, after my dear friend Andy Card was the other chief of staff, says, Bono, you're going to meet Bono. He said, you do know who he is, don't you? And I said, yeah, he's a famous Irish rock star. And just as Josh was leaving the room, I said, and used to be married to Cher. And I kept my poker face as long as possible. So there's a lot of moments of humor in this book, because Believe it or not, my administration, in the midst of trauma, was pretty lighthearted at times. We got along well, and there was a lot of joy amidst the grief.
Well, finally, Mr. President, there's two older women who appear at various points in the book, and I'm wondering if you could tell us which one was more formidable, Queen Elizabeth II or Barbara Bush?
Yeah. Well, I tell my mother, I put in there that, well, I tell a lot of stories about my mom, and, I adore my dad and my mother as well. I used to tell people when I ran for governor of Texas, I had my daddy's eyes in my mother's mouth, which would generally get a laugh, but it's true. And my mother's formidable. I mean, when I told her I was going to run against Ann Richards, her reaction was, "You can't win." Thanks, Mom. She's unbelievable. And but I tell her.
What'd she tell you at the tell them one of the marathon?
Oh yeah. So after my dad lost in '92, I decided that I'm going to run out my frustrations by training for and running the Houston Marathon. At mile 19, their church, St. Martin's Church, was there, and it just so happened I go running by the church right about the time the 9:30 service empties out. So it's like 10:30 or however long the service lasts. And, my dad, "There's my boy," he yells. And Mother says, "There's 3 fat people ahead of you."
You want to do the Queen?
Yeah, sure.
That's not what you heard for the Queen?
No, the Queen. And so Laura and I went to Buckingham Palace and had a majestic stay. And I asked the Queen if I could see her corgis. And they came in, beautiful dogs. They're very well behaved. And I mused to myself, of course. Thankfully, Barney's not here, because he'd be barking for Scottish independence. But let me conclude by one story in the book. First, Michael, thank you very much for being here, and thank you all for your interest. There's a lot of stories in the book, and I was giving a speech. You remember the speech I gave in Bucharest, welcoming Romania to NATO? And just before I got up to the podium, there's like a couple of 100,000 people there, and they were here. They were there to hear the American president welcome the NATO, which is a big deal for people who had just come out from underneath communism to know that an attack on one was an attack on all, which is Article 5 of the NATO treaty. And there was a lit balcony amidst the kind of drizzle and dimness of the day. And I said, "What is that?" And they said, "Well, that's the balcony where the tyrant Ceausescu had given his last speech. And it was a memorial to freedom." And President Iliescu introduces me, and a full rainbow appears. And it was a startling moment, and I stepped back to take in this rainbow and then said, "God is smiling on us." And the reason I did is because the rainbow ended exactly behind the balcony where the tyrant had given his last speech. Thank you for coming.